Well, I think they've set out the situation as they see it. I do think they have sought to do that. But I think there are many things that haven't been said. And I think what hasn't been said is the extent to which the evidence is rapidly emerging that many, many people are going to be very worse off whatever form of Brexit is now chosen. Now, as the evidence emerges that every single form of Brexit that anyone has tested leaves us worse off as a country and worse off as individuals, people have to reflect and focus on what the emerging deal may actually mean to their lives. And I think if nobody tells them that, they would have every reason to feel aggrieved.
Now, you said very clearly that the national interest must come above party interest. And I'm just wondering what kind of a Brexit would be in the national interest?
Well, I don't think it's for me to frame the Brexit not being part of the negotiations. But I think the objectives that the government have set out and the promises that were made to people during the referendum campaign give a clear idea. We were told during the referendum campaign that we'd have unimpeded access to the single market. Many people no doubt voted because immediately after they voted for Brexit, opinion polls said they wished to remain in the single market. Well, you can't just ignore that and say, oh no, we voted for Brexit, so therefore that must mean we leave the single market. That simply is not logical.
But is there any Brexit? Is there any Brexit that could be in the national interest?
There's no Brexit that will leave us as well off as we are now. I can conceive of none, and neither can any of the economic bodies that have looked at it. The IMF, the OECD, the Institute of Fiscal Studies, the National Institute for Economic and Social Research, Nobel Prize-winning economists, none of them. All of them have examined different forms of Brexit. None of them have found one that leaves any part of the United Kingdom as well off as it is today, let alone better off than it is today. So it is a lose-lose situation. If the decision is taken that we cannot remain a full member of the European Union because it is now politically impossible after the referendum vote, then we must make sure we have a form of Brexit which minimises the damage, not just to the country, but minimises the damage to ordinary, everyday people, and lots of people in small firms.
I reported you when you were Prime Minister, and I've never seen you so passionate about an issue as I see you here and now. And I'm wondering, how close to what you called national self-harm do you think this country is?
Well, I think we're very close to national self-harm. I do feel very strongly about this. I remember very well where I came from. I know what it is like when the week is longer than the money. And that is going to be the position for people in the future unless we are very careful in how we negotiate this Brexit. That's not what I wish to see. I have never known our country so divided on so many issues. I have never known our institutions, whether it is the politicians or the police, as disregarded as they are at the present time. And that is immensely damaging and immensely dangerous. We cannot ignore that. We have to look at reality and we have to follow policies. I hate making a speech, which I know will cause friction with my own party. It's not in my nature to do so. I never have done so. But I just simply cannot sit there and watch us moving in a direction that I am utterly convinced is going to be damaging for millions of ordinary people who ought to expect better from their parliament.
But you know what the Brexiteers are already saying.
I have no
You, John Major, are trying to frustrate the will of the British people.
Yes, well, that's because they've no argument. The only argument they've ever got is we're frustrating the will of the British people. 37% of the British people voted to leave Europe. 63% either voted to stay or didn't vote. And since the Brexiteers spent the whole of their time talking about the sovereignty of Parliament, they can hardly object if I suggest Parliament now effectively takes control and decides at the end whether this is the right Brexit for us or not, or sends people back to renegotiate, or sends the decision off to the country in a referendum. The Brexiteers are the last people in the world in any position to argue against those points that I made this afternoon. It won't stop them, of course, but it is ludicrous of them to do so.
We are an elective democracy, and you've talked already of the sovereignty of Parliament. Why are you prepared to envision a referendum, a second referendum, under certain circumstances? Why not under no circumstances?
Well, I'm only prepared to do it because it would be authorised by Parliament. That was the point I definitely made. that I would prefer the matter to be solved in Parliament. But if Parliament felt, because of the divisions in the country, that they had to consult the country again, then Parliament should determine there should be a second referendum.
You're still a devoted Conservative. Even when you were Prime Minister, perhaps particularly when you were Prime Minister, that split in the party was wrecking your attempts to produce all sorts of measures.
Yes.
Why should the country have to pay for the splits in your party?
Well, I don't think the country should pay for the splits in any party. I don't think that. And I think those of us who think that I do need to speak out, because the majority of our party are not ultra-Brexiteers. They're not people who take a very forceful and stern, sometimes even Gradgrindian view of the world. They take a different view. If you look at the people who've got into the Conservative Party in the last 2 years, they are as good an intake as I have seen for a very long time. And I'm very proud that they have gone into the party that I have served all my life. But I freely admit, just as the people who are ultra-Brexiteers disagree with almost everything I say, I have very little traction with their policies. But they are, in terms of the Conservative vote in the country, a minority. And the suggestion that we should desert the party and leave the ground for them to take over is not something that appeals to me at all.
You're in for trouble, you know that, don't you? I mean, there will be abuse, there will be hatred, and there will be despising comments made. Have you factored all that in? Or do you believe that there is enough of a body politic out there that in some way the equation is going to be changed by the intervention of a Prime Minister who is, after all, having to attack his successor?
I was aware of how what I said would be twisted and turned and used. I'm not naive about these things. I'm not a novice. I was very well aware that that is code, but they were not my audience. They can say what they like about me. There's precious little they haven't said in the past. My purpose is not to speak to them. My purpose is to speak to the people out in the country who all they have heard in the Brexit debate is the slogans on one side or the other. All they've heard is the philosophical arguments about taking control or being a Eurocrat and a Europhile. Whereas behind those arguments are solid, hard facts that affect people's lives. And if I can get through to some of those people, then it will have been a very worthwhile exercise from my point of view.